Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
Welcome everybody, glad you're here today. We are going to be talking about the state of the art of children's apps, and I feel really excited to be talking about this because I can remember I've been the Kid Tech columnist for USA Today since the year 2000, and it was the year that the iPad was released was the first time I did an apps column. So, I mean, that was sort of interesting to watch that's when I really started to really hone in and focus on it as well. So I'm thrilled to have on this panel with me. I'm going to let each of these panelists give you sort of a 1-minute short history of who they are, when they first entered the app world, and give us a little bit of a play of how you focused on coming in and what did you do, because we're going to be talking about 3 things today: the evolution, what's current, and where we think things are headed. So let me start with Dave Lippis from Budge. If you would please, give us your 1-minute little thing.
Thanks, Jinny. Happy to be here. Budge Studios, we're an app developer and publisher. We've been around about 5 years, just prior to the iPad coming out. And we focus, or have focused certainly largely, on working with well-known IP in the kid space. So be it Barbie or Thomas the Tank Engine or Caillou, Minnie Mouse, that kind of thing. Prior to sort of moving into the app space, I've been in business with my business partners for 15 years. We actually started out in the audio side of things, doing a service company specialized in producing music and sound for video games. And sort of through that, there was a natural evolution for us. We always wanted to get into the product side of things, and when the App Store generated its momentum and kids' content was sort of lacking, we saw an opportunity just, again, prior to the iPad coming out to say, hey, you know what? The barrier to entry was a bit lower. We could jump into this market, give it a try. So we hired a programmer on Craigslist and did a prototype, and the rest is sort of history. He's currently our CTO, by the way. That's our story.
Great. And the next panelist is Raul Gutierrez, and he is CEO and founder of Tinybop. So Raul?
So I just did an hour about the company, so I'm not going to recap. But basically, my story is that I've been playing around with programming pretty much my entire life. Got an Apple II when I was 9 years old and started programming for that. I was one of the very first Mac developers. I had the Inside Mac Xerox with Andy Hertzfeld notes in 1984. And then I kind of fell out of that in college because I felt like I was interested in other things. And so I was an art history and electrical engineering major, and always everything I do is sort of at that intersection between sort of art and science.
Great. And next down on the panel here is Jim Nichols, and you are the co-founder of Thup Games. So would you give us a little bit of a insight on you?
Yeah, so I founded Thup in 2002 with my partner Peter Ginsberg. And at that time, he and I did web games, and we released our first app in 2009, Monkey Preschool Lunchbox, and since then we've made a long line of Monkey Preschool games. Prior to that, I did a lot of animation and web design. I worked in interactive design a lot. I was here in San Francisco during the dot-com boom. I worked at a website that some of you might know called BlueMountain.com. At one point, it was one of the biggest sites in the world. And pretty much my entire career has just been around character design, interaction, and game design.
Great. And then last on the panel is Luke. Let me hope I say this right. So Luke, I'm going to try. Beaulieu.
That's good enough.
And he is CTO of Frima Studios. So a little bit about you?
Yes, thanks, Jinny. So my background is more on the tech side. So I've I'm an ex-programmer, I guess. So back in the high school, a little bit before, I was playing around with a computer that had like 4K of memory to do everything. So these days, we have much more than that. Frima is a digital entertainment company. Our biggest division is video games. So we've been doing video games for kids and family, hundreds of them for companies like Lego, Mattel, Hasbro, Disney, and others, and a couple of our own IPs. And we focus a lot now on connected toy and smart toys. We're showing off some of them at that booth upstairs. And yeah, very happy to be here.
Great. So let's start with talking about sort of the evolution of what's happened in the kid app space. What do you all think has been the biggest, what have you seen changing since the launch of the iPad? And remind me again, who was there at the very beginning besides Jim? Were you the only one that was really there? So why don't you take this question first, okay?
I was there before the iPad.
Yeah, because you were starting out on the iPhone.
It was 2009.
Right.
In fact, I think it's in 2 weeks it'll be 6 years ago, which feels like a lifetime, and it's so short to think about how much things have changed. With the iPad coming out, that was a huge change.
Yeah. Real estate bigger.
Just real estate bigger, just what screens were to families. I mean, I think it's not so much necessarily that anything about those devices has changed that much. I mean, the software has changed, but I think the integration and just the overall ubiquity, the penetration, how it's just a default device is part of it. It's not necessarily a technological change, even though they're more powerful and people do more things with it. It's just that they've become almost irreplaceable, something that didn't even exist a short time ago. People use them for so many things. So I think it's more the human side of it just driving the device as opposed to the device itself really changing that much.
Right. Well, and as we've all been a part of this world and it's become, as you say, just familiar to everyone, I guess my question then becomes, as we get game fluency and touch fluency and tilt fluency and all those things, and particularly with parents and kids, how has that changed the way, from when you first started making apps to where you're starting to make apps now? Well, how does that work in terms of stuff? You want to jump in, please?
I'll give it a shot. Well, I think there's an education has sort of happened, and it's been a fast one. I think that, and I think it's been driven by kids, maybe more so than parents, in terms of if you want to talk about fluency. Jim just sort of mentioned the iPad. What it did for the kids industry or kids video game industry is very unique. Prior to that, you had consoles, you had different types of controls that for a preschooler, we're talking 3 years, 4 years, 5 years old. Very difficult. There wasn't an industry that was quite the same. There was some stuff on PC, etc. But for really young preschoolers to be that interactive didn't exist. And now you throw the iPad into it, and they pick it up, and it's swipe and tap, and so super intuitive. I don't think any one of us necessarily predicted it, although I'd like to think that we all thought so. We knew it was going to happen. But it's just amazing to see. And parents are sort of following that, saying, wow, our kids are digesting this content so easily. They're enjoying it. It's interactive. It's educational. It's edutainment. And this whole thing, it's pretty remarkable.
Well, I think for the first time you had a generation of kids that had the most advanced technology in their hands. Yeah. When even sort of a few years before that, you wouldn't let a 3-year-old at your computer.
Right. Unless they were on your lap.
Unless they were on your lap. But even then, you probably didn't want them to touch the keyboard. And,
right.
And so not only did it sort of move everything younger, but they had, they wanted to have content. They wanted to have things that were designed for them, and so that sort of led to this sort of gold rush of developers. And I think that with any new technology, you have the first generation of developers or people that are sort of doing something else, and they're like, I can figure this out. They're sort of hobbyist, 1 and 2 person companies. And I think the biggest change from then to now is while you still have some of that, there are now sort of funded companies in the space that are really kind of making a mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just kind of like to say that as far as gaming and everything else goes, also, the inputs are limited, but what people have, there's been so many different games and attempts and approaches and genres sort of created that there's a whole existing language. And I don't know if you saw Raul's talk, but he has a new product coming out, and he has a little demo of it, and a few years ago, people might not have had any idea what it was talking about, but now people are so familiar with these devices that it's really able to communicate what they can do. And I think that this is a whole other language that people have learned.
So in essence, what we're saying is that because we've got a fluency level that we didn't have when it first started, we're now maybe seeing that next generation of complicated, interesting things that you can do with kids on these devices, because you no longer have to spend your time at the very, so much time trying to teach them how to interact. You can now take it to a whole new level. And I agree with you. I as a reviewer, what I'm starting to see that what is innovative is ways that people are taking these devices and thinking about them on a totally higher level than we saw 4 or 5 years ago. So, Luke, do you have?
Yeah, actually, one of the things is that kids of a certain age, maybe not too young, but they're more fluent than their parents with those devices. They'll teach their parents how to, to set up Wi-Fi and things like that. So it's less and less a problem to make big tutorials and things like that. Kids will take the pad, and that new controller for them is natural. So.
Right. Early on in this, as this industry was growing, I don't think we saw very many IPs. Initially there was a lot of just novel, new ideas. It was because the entry level was so low that you could come in. I sort of felt like there was a lot of spaghetti being thrown at the wall to see what was going to stick. But I think that the landscape has been changing now, and could you guys talk a little bit? I know several of you work on IPs, famous brands and whatever. So let's talk a little bit about that, how we think we've seen it change over the years.
We primarily work with popular IP. We do have our own original IP, but sort of jumped into it saying, we're going to attack this and attack the issue of discoverability by partnering with and licensing great products. So we worked with Disney and Nickelodeon and others. So I think it's been around for some time. We've been doing that for the last 5 years. So as the iPad came out, we were already there with some IP. That said, I think the bigger companies are always sort of taking a look. They're not as quick, not as agile.
Yeah, they don't jump in quite as quickly, right?
There was a sort of a flood of innovation, and because there was, I think, a void in terms of quality content, you have companies. We're sitting up here that have sort of drove that market and tried to do innovative things with or without IP. Of course, IP tends to be very popular, and this is something that I guess is the challenge in the marketplace, because you want, I think, a healthy balance between the IP that kids know and love. They love Disney stuff, they always will, but you also want to have the innovation that I think has come from indie studios, and that goes for all gaming, console gaming, mobile gaming, whatnot, and you want to kind of have that balance. So I'm curious to see where it goes. I think distributors like Apple, Amazon, Google, I think they still like to promote independent, but I think it's certainly a challenge, and it's a challenge on the IP side, by the way, as well. There's a flood of stuff out there, popular IP and independent. So I think overall in the industry, it becomes a challenge as it matures. Who's going to be able to continue to innovate and put great product to market that's going to resonate, and who's going to have that brand, that company that's going to establish trust with the consumer.
So let me tag on that a little bit. So, we all know that the being featured in the app stores is a really great thing. But let's talk a little bit about the role of the app stores. If initially we really had iTunes doing stuff, but now we have Amazon and Google Play and all that stuff, and kind of talk a little bit about where you felt that store combination was, how important it was back then and where it is now, because my perception is that it's changing a little bit in terms of, I think that the stores the banners used to really move product. I'm not sure it moves it quite as much, because there seems to be, it doesn't seem to be as helpful. That's my personal opinion. Am I wrong? I would love for you guys to weigh in.
Well, I think that You can definitely see that consumer behavior is changing around response to promotions in the store. One thing, to talk about the App Store in particular, they just have a lot of different kinds of promotions. So it's sort of hard to tease out because they do a lot of weekly promotions. They've got a lot of tiered promotions. Of course, there's the front page promotion, and then there's the category promotion.
Right.
So I think that the features, maybe they're not giving this astronomical boost that
Did they used to?
well, certainly they did. I mean,
Okay.
I think that, but also they've changed a lot of the way they present them. So, for example, the banners, there can be a lot of slides in that banner now. So
Yeah.
so in the aggregate, it's hard to say. As an individual developer, I certainly have seen it's really large increase. The last two apps that we released, Zuzu's Bananas was our last one. It was a huge spike, and then we did one in Explorers. It was called Monkey Preschool Explorers. And that was last summer, and we also were featured on Facebook, their Facebook page. So that was a giant spike. So it's definitely there, but it's just hard to tease out now because there's just so many apps and there's so many points of feature.
So let's take that for a minute, because one of the things that I think a lot of kid app developers are really worried about is discovery. And so you guys have all got some good legs under you in terms of how do you go about doing things. So other than sending me code early, note, please do that. Let's talk a little bit about how do you guys, I mean, you're all successful app developers, and key to that, other than making a great product and getting it out there, discovery is a big issue. We all know that. So can you guys kind of focus on that a little bit? What's your advice to the group here?
My advice, first and foremost, it's obviously when you're first starting with your first app, it's really hard. And for those of you that saw the talk that I gave, we built a mailing list for a full year before we released our product.
Right. Brilliant idea.
And so you have to develop a group of people that sort of buy into the idea of your brand. Once you have product out there, getting followers on Twitter, and being smart about it, and not just having a Twitter feed that's just endlessly promotional, but is actually adding value to the network of parents that follow you. Things like that can be hugely helpful. I think we have 70,000 Twitter followers now, which for a kids app company is relatively large. And we know that moves sales. Like
Interesting.
when we have something new, we can put it there, and we can literally see. We can hit the button and start seeing the spikes when that happens.
And just a footnote aside, I mean, I'm amazed because when I write about a company, I'm always looking for a way to let the company know I've written about them. I mean, obviously I can email you, but I use Twitter a lot as well, as sort of a lot of journalists, and so I immediately am looking for your Twitter account, and I'm amazed at how many app companies don't have a Twitter account. So I can't, it's just one of those ways where I'm trying to help in that discovery process, and sometimes I can't do it that way, or I have to go to Facebook or someplace else and find them. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, if I was going to add something, Raul, I totally agree. I think what's important here, we let in with Apple features. Yes, that's, I think, important. It's free acquisition,
Right.
quote unquote. But, we've seen it over our evolution too. It's nice to sit back and watch a feature and go, wow, that worked. I didn't have to do anything except for, have a relationship with Apple, and they kind of took notice, and great. But we also realize sometimes when a product comes out and gets some of that traction, that if you don't have the whole system set up, example, be it Twitter, Facebook, mailing list, fans, users, etc. If you don't have some of that kind of set up to retain them, to keep them engaged, which is sort of part of on the product side, it's like a sieve, right? So you can have 100, 1 million,
Yeah, you
it
had this
doesn't
great
matter,
spike,
and
but-
it sort of disappears, and now you've got to restart all over again the next time you put a product out. So I think the key here, and I think everybody on this panel has certainly done so, is to really build a strategy. We did it as we learned, app by app. I think that's something interesting in the kid space. We can release multiple products versus, personally, we put out multiple products a year. We don't work on a product for 3 years, put it to market, go, okay, now we got to wait another 3 years to apply what we've learned. So we're always learning and trying to set that up and make sure that we have a comprehensive strategy, I guess.
But we always think that customers are our best advocates. So our mailing list is highly segmented. We have a mailing list of just teachers, and they're connected to the teacher community. We have a mailing list of people that we said, we'd love it if you would review us, if you want to be a beta tester. And so now, we know that the reviews are really important in the App Store, especially when you launch. So we launch to those people and we say, please, can you help us? And because they like what we're producing, they advocate for us. And I saw on some developer list, somebody was complaining, they said, Tinybop must be paying for their reviews. It's like, no, we're not paying for our reviews, but we do have a very dedicated set of people that review everything that we do. And even when we do updates, we'll ask them to, re-up their reviews. And so we can get like 100 reviews in a day. And that it's very helpful.
Similarly, we have a program called Budge Playgroup, which we launched last year. We have Playgroup Live and we have Playgroup sort of beta testing. And, on one hand, yes, informative for us. We get to, send our product out. We have over 6,000 participants at this stage, over 50 different countries, all providing us with feedback in progress as we're developing our apps. And, for us, what's important, we also do this on site at Budge, where it's like a kindergarten in our studio. You walk in, there's little tables, chairs, and kids sort of hanging out and enjoying it. They get their name in the credits, etc. They give us valuable feedback, and parents and kids tend to love this. They participate. They love sharing their ideas, being part of the product. And at the end of the day, we also end up with a very loyal fan base. We're trying to establish trust this way because we care about what we're putting to market. We want kids to have fun, and if they're not, and the flow isn't right because it's too confusing, or the product doesn't resonate, or they don't like the characters, that's a lot of investment for nothing. And we end up with a customer base that maybe isn't as devoted. And so things of that nature, I think, are very helpful.
So Dave, this is a really innovative program, and just so the audience understands, you use TestFlight, right?
That's right.
And about how many families are, and this is in essence you're beta testing an app, right? When you're releasing it, you're putting it out to this group first to get feedback?
That's right.
And about how many families are you using?
I don't know the family number, but like I said, I think we're up at about 6,000 odd participants.
Yeah.
We're all in different countries, so we get a lot of different feedback. Some of it's very encouraging. Some of it is, my child cannot work this app at all. I mean, obviously it's a work in progress at that stage, but nonetheless, you look at it and you go, wow, we thought this was obvious, and it's not, and the large majority of children are enjoying this, or they'll point out a character they love. We go, fantastic. We're developing an original IP called Miss Hollywood. We've put out 2 apps. They've done tremendously well. But a large part of that is because we receive feedback. We put out, I think we had 10 or 12 characters, and we kind of sent that out early, and, I had my favorite character. I was wrong. I'm not a 4-year-old girl, but they came back with great feedback, and it helps you make maybe critical decisions that can be the difference between it sort of being a flash in the pan or something that might have more traction.
So we're in a very crowded market. We have 3 big stores in which you can play in. In this current state of affairs, let's talk a little bit about some advice you'd have for the group about how to make money. And in that, let's talk a little bit about the different models that you guys have all been exploring, because within this group, we've got the whole thing from freemium to pay. Do we have anybody that does the give you some free and then we unlock the rest? That model, the pay to try? Not really. But anyway, can you guys share, your thoughts? Because I think several of you have played with a variety of different models, and within the kids space with the CAPA requirements, there's some things here that make it tricky. So what advice have you got about how do you make money in this space? Because that's the big issue for a lot of people.
It seems to me that the main thing that you have to do is make good content, and regardless of whether you have a freemium strategy or a paid strategy, as long as you're not doing like awful things there are different strategies that work for different types of content, but it really is about the content. If you're an IP-based company and you're just producing something that's marketing for some other entity, kids aren't going to care and parents aren't going to pay for it. If you build something that a parent comes to you and they say, my kid for the first time is asked about this or that, or that, my kid is cracking up at your game. If you make a kid laugh or you make them ask questions, you pretty much have a parent who's into your brand and a kid that's into your brand.
What's interesting, Raul, is you're whole basis has been about making apps that really appeal to a wide range. What's interesting is the other three of you have done very specific age level apps. So will you guys jump in here, because I think it's a different strategy. Dave, a lot of your stuff is based on brands, so you're getting an audience immediately by a brand recognition and trying to do something that moves that brand, right?
That's true, and the challenge there is making sure that we pair the brand with the right experience.
Right.
One of my business partner, Michael, often talks about that. It's really about, just because you have the brand and you throw it to market. There've been plenty of talks for ages in the video game space about how tricky it is to create a successful game that's going to sell well with a brand.
Right.
In the kid space, it's working phenomenally. It's really working well, but it can also be, again, I said it before, it can be a spike and it disappears. Downloads in a free-to-play space, you'll get the discoverability, but if you're not converting well because you don't create a game that's engaging and that resonates well, that's a lost opportunity, and that's something we work very hard to avoid, because again, when it's free to try, we don't do currency model games at all. It's not something we believe in for this space. There's always sort of an unlock pack, a maximum you can spend. That's sort of, again, it's about safety, it's about experience, and it's about creating an engaging product that works.
Jim, how about you?
Well, I think that there's the business model part of it, and you have to be aware of the marketplace, and you have to think about where are the opportunities. But I think really it does start with sort of an authenticity, sort of what are you trying to get across, because at some point it's going to break down a little bit. It's not necessarily, you could maybe do a lot of testing because these are all your ideas and you just want to see how they play, or you can just say, I have this point of view and I'm bringing it forward, and then you have to make decisions based on that. Also, you have to be realistic. So it's a sort of like a hopeful pragmatism that you probably have to do. And as far as in the store, a lot of things are kind of out of your hands once you're in the marketplace. So I think that you have to just be very aware of what you're doing, and you have to sort of really check yourself. What is my goal here, and am I serving that goal? Because it really is about content, which is an easy thing to say, but at the end of the day, if you can't sort of maintain that authenticity, or if you're producing something for the marketplace and they're already familiar with this sort of approach that you're doing, they're gonna already have experiences that they're judging you by. So I think that's a big part of it, because the business model part is huge. Free's really giant right now, so that's something you have to think about.
Luke, you have
Yeah, we've as a servicing company, mainly we've done pretty much all the models. What we see a lot, works, but again, it's not a way to make money directly with the app. Are marketing apps. So for instance, we do something for Lego. Of course, there's going to be millions of downloads, but it's a support of a physical product. So one of the model that's not in the traditional model for apps to make money, and it's not accessible for everyone, is to actually have a physical product and make money off of the physical product. So the app is there to support it. So more and more we see that from Skylanders up. A lot more of these products have come out, and we think that there's an opportunity there to monetize with the physical goods that the app is supporting.
Yeah, I agree, and we're going to come back a little bit more to that as we get a little bit more into the future trends. Let me just kind of finish up the current stuff, and then we'll move that way. Talk a little bit about how do you guys view the multiple store aspect? I know, Raul, you're iOS only, right? Are the rest of you on Android as well? And how do you think through your development process because of that?
Well, I know on our side we are cross-platform. We put our products out on iOS as we do with on Google Play and for Amazon, and so on Samsung Store, even a little bit on Microsoft, believe it or not. And I think that our approach is there are lots of eyeballs out there. There's amazing traction on all stores. There are different users and different buying behaviors for a variety of different reasons. But I mean, if you take a look at what iOS does, fantastic. A lot of us lead with that. That said, you look at Google Play, the amount of downloads, eyeballs, growth there is phenomenal. So you cannot ignore that. They're a great partner of ours. And Amazon, you look at the Kindle, and Amazon users purchase. You know, that's their behavior. You know, we see that. We certainly see the volume may be lower, but at the same time, we see people who use that device will go ahead and commit. So I think it's important to take a look at that if you're building out a strategy and you want to be in the game. That you're going to need to look at it. I think because there are opportunities across all platforms.
Right, and I've talked to developers before who said, we launched only on iOS and then realized that we hadn't really thought through it carefully, and then it became expensive to move it to Android. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, well, we very early on adopted Unity to do that, and I think I just tell my partner Peter to hit the Android button, and then it goes to, he does that.
Does that work?
Yeah, it does.
We're doing a lot of R&D.
You go Android, and then it just goes boom. But it is a great platform. We love Unity. I'm a big. It's got great third-party software. I love being as many places as we can. We were in Google Play very early. I think one of the first. If we did that first approach, we had to create a whole different code base, and my partner was going bananas, and I was taking a day off. So then we looked and we decided to go Unity, and it's great. So we put ourselves in a lot of different places with a lot of different partners, and I think that's really important. I think that a very holistic perspective on development is kind of key to really getting to as many places as you can, and it also kind of keeps you open for anything else that might pop up that you can't predict.
And Raul, you did this in a different way, which was that you said, when I release, I'm going to release in how many different languages?
We are now we're in 60, but we initially were in 50.
Yeah, and talk just for a minute, because I know you and I once had a conversation about how you went out and found, most people don't think in terms of, okay, I'm going to not just release in the United States, I'm going to release in the world. And I think I was very impressed with how Raul thought this through.
To me, that's one of the biggest opportunities of any of these app stores, that you can hit a button and hit everywhere. And obviously, it's not just language. There's acculturation issues, and even like weird punctuation issues. There's all sorts of crazy things you have to do to make it happen. But if you focus on it early, and you have sort of you build a system that works for you, the language is like the easiest part of our process now.
And how did you find your various?
Initially, we just put Craigslist ads all over the world, and
I love this.
we asked for English. We asked for science teachers, and we had like a little bit of text, and we asked them to translate it. And we didn't offer money or anything. We just wanted to see if we could get people that were sort of interested and could provide us good translations. And from that, we built a list. We now have like 200 translators on our list. We hook it into sort of a system that we use on Google Docs, where they kind of check against each other, and then they get paid via PayPal. And we get very, very high quality results out of it, and it's really not that hard. And we are also on Unity, and we're actually ready for Android. For us, it's more of a marketing issue and a focus issue. And we think that once we move over there, we'll have unique advantages because of the language thing.
For the record, we're on Unity as well. I think it's
so there we have some consensus there.
There's some work to do sometimes in terms of making things, I guess, on the pipeline, but it works very well. And
so. Seems to be we've been having, now that we're sort of 5 years into this new industry, we're starting to see some consolidation. The Ansel and Claire apps, which were very highly rated, got acquired by Fingerprint in last year. We had the Bugs and Buttons people. They had several apps. They got picked up by Cupcake. We have the Fox and Sheep people got acquired by a big toy company in Haba. So, we're starting to see some changes happening. How do you think that's affecting innovation, where we're headed, this industry is starting to consolidate a little bit. So what's your feeling on that matter?
I think we've seen this in the video game industry over and over again, if you want to liken it to that, where there's sort of a recycling of this cycle, I could say, where you have independents that drive a lot of growth and innovation. the appetite for larger companies and or independents that have grown, they want to establish themselves in the market, so there's consolidation that happens.
Yep.
And then it sort of becomes, less players. The market evolves. Right now, I think the kids market is moving into its adolescence a little bit.
Yep.
And I think the effect is, with any industry, like the web industry 20 years ago, you're going to find yourself where, everybody wants to be in it, but it's not all quality and not everybody's going to run a viable business. It's going to be a challenge, and it is a bit of a survival of the fittest, and that's what makes business fun. So I think what you're going to see is, I think there's going to be plenty of innovation. I think that consolidation is interesting. Even with consolidation, it doesn't mean that those that are consolidating or acquiring are making the right decisions either. So
Right.
I think it's going to be an interesting shift to see who's going to be there. And I think at the end of the day, we've said this before, I think content will reign supreme. Those that are still creating amazing content are going to do well, because kids don't really lie, certainly not the preschool age.
Yeah.
Well, okay, they might lie a bit, but ultimately they won't lie when they're playing their product. They're either going to play it or they're going to put it down after 10 seconds. So.
Well, and I think a lot of the sort of the big companies that own a lot of IP, instead of farming it out, it's going to be something they want to own. Like, I think a lot of those companies still think of apps as marketing, and not as sort of their own entities. And even Disney is just starting to make Mickey Mouse apps that feel like their own thing.
Yeah.
And I think naturally, you've seen this in every other sort of technology industry, that those companies will start to bring some of that stuff in-house. They'll start to develop it in-house, and eventually you'll start to see sort of new things that are based on that IP, but that are really sort of unique to these devices.
Right.
Especially as the devices become commoditized and they get cheaper and cheaper.
Yep. So let's go back a little bit to where Luke started to hint. Let's move into a little bit of the trend stuff. And I do think this toy app situation that you started to talk about is starting to happen. And how do you guys think about it? I think, Raul, you hinted at during your speech before this one that you're looking at it.
We're very interested in toys, and I think we have some good ideas for toys, and we're just trying to figure out a lot of the logistics of the best way to pull that off. It seems like a natural sort of, our content starts on devices and we'll go out to, we actually see toys as a potential huge growth opportunity, if we can sort of pull it off in a way that where we don't get bogged down in shipping stuff to toy stores. So, I think that's a big future trend. The other thing that I think is happening is that because you have these kids that are sort of native on these devices, that they're way ahead of where parents are. And so very young kids are doing things like social media and so on that is not really designed for them. And that's something that I think all of us that are making these kind of things have to really think about and service this desire that kids have for these things.
Interesting.
Yeah, actually, our adventure started when we worked on the Skylanders, and from that point on, we really, loved the physical to digital play, or digital to physical play, and we started investing a lot of time in that, building prototypes and things like that. And another thing that we see a lot, well, going back to the Skylanders, so kids they want to play with physical toys. So Skylanders is a figurine, or Disney Infinity is a figurine. They can't. At least my kids didn't play a lot with the figurines themselves. So we think there's still an opportunity there to make that toy an actual toy. So Lego Dimension might actually be in that, go more in that direction. So we think there's an opening there. And the second one is with AR and VR. It's everywhere, and there's a lot of traction with Facebook getting Oculus and Google and others investing in Magic Leap, Apple purchasing Mateo, an SDK for AR, and lots more. And this shows that this is going somewhere, and on the kids market, it's definitely gonna have a future when all the health issues and all the technical issues will be taken care of. Most of the phones and tablet in 3 years or a couple of years will have depth sensing cameras and everything needed, the power needed to make those apps really cool.
So as an app developer, when you see these trends happening and you see that there are new exciting ways to be developing, at what point do you jump in? How do you make that decision?
I think timing is everything. I think it's finding that balance between, do you want to be first to market? That sounds great sometimes, but a lot of times that can be quite painful. I think you have to kind of assess where the business is. We do that. We'll take a look. Okay, well, where are we successful? We always do R&D. We have our tech team that's always forward-looking. Whether it be new technology from released by Google or Apple or whatnot. But you have to be aware. I think you have to look at toys, and you have to look at subscription. You have to look at all the trends that are happening and say, okay, well, when do I want to jump in, and how am I going to do it better?
And does it work in your situation, right?
Yeah,
in what you're trying to create?
Absolutely. I think we're all in the kids' interactive entertainment business. At the end of the day, whether it's apps or not, we're developing and building brand equity. We're trying to build up the company name, the trust with the parents and kids, so that it can transcend what an app is today. If it moves to connected toys, and that's all where it is, great. If it moves to something else, terrific. But at the end of the day, this is, I think, a launch pad. I'll speak for ourselves. Certainly a launch pad into the kids' interactive entertainment world, which prior to the iPad or the iPhone anyway, I think was a very high barrier to entry. And today we're all sitting here because of that opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, I can give you a practical example. It's, Apple initially, when the watch came out,
Yeah.
they very much want developers to develop for the watch, and that they make it clear that they want you to sort of look at it. So we got watches for the office, and I started wearing one, and I felt like with kids maybe it's sort of a parent's device, but then I found with this new app that we're building that my kids kept wanting to wear my watch, and I would wake up and it would be off of the side of the bed, and my kid would be wearing it.
Maybe you needed to set up that
exactly
the device the way
and
you showed in your thing.
So, we actually have a watch feature for this new sort of app programming language. You can trigger things off the watch, and the kids have been having a ball with it.
Interesting.
So it totally made sense. It wasn't it didn't cost us a ton of money to do. Apple's happy that we have a new sort of unique watch product, and then it's sort of a win-win-win. Like, is it going to be used in that many? Like the geeks that have Apple watches, maybe they will.
But it also sounds like it was an intuitive fit, right? That it seemed organic to you to be able to do it?
I think you have to play with the new technologies. There are definitely things that are sort of on the horizon that everybody knows are on the horizon, that things like the haptic touch and force touch, and that you have to sort of think through your product line. How would we do this? And so you always have to be aware of what you think is going to be happening, and look at the apps that you have and say, how could I use this? And if it makes sense, it makes sense.
Right. One last thing, I am getting the sign that we need to be rounding this up a little bit, ending it up. There seems to be a move a little bit, particularly I'm taking my cues from Toca Boca, who has announced that they're sort of heading into some video stuff. And I think that sort of relates around what you guys are all saying, that kids don't really see barriers. They just like to be able to look at and play and have fun with characters in all different kinds of situations. So is video something that you're thinking about more? I mean, the popularity of YouTube and all that sort of thing. How do you guys factor that in what you're developing?
Well, for us, it's sort of a natural fit probably to do an extension, but it's a lot of investment to get in there. So it's something we'd like to do, but not anything that we're seriously pursuing right now.
Because, Jim, you have a very identifiable character that you have based your apps on.
Right.
So that makes sense to me as well.
But there's a very high barrier of entry in video.
I think it depends. I mean, if you're talking about creating a video streaming app itself, that's one type of product that one could jump into, be it creating their own content or be it licensing available content. But we're always very cautious with sort of the grass is always greener. I think everybody here has developed a suite of products that works well for them. We certainly have the products that work well for us. We like having this digital toy box that has all sorts of different experiences. Yes, we can throw some video in. For Miss Hollywood, for example, we start with this almost minute-long narrative, we animated that all in-house. It's so much fun to do with an original IP, and a natural extension could be to build that out. We're certainly well positioned to do so, but I think it's just another piece of content. Kids love video, they also love games, they also love learning, so it's really a question of picking and choosing what you're good at and running with what you're great at.
I mean, I see video as a tidal wave that's coming. I mean, if you look at the sort of the amount of time that kids are removing from television and coming, and so I think the people that figure that out are going to build gigantic businesses. And so I think it's something that has to be watched very carefully, and if you're somebody that's creating content, you have to be thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I consider my kids to be in the video generation, at least that's what I call it. And basically, when I ask my kids what they want to do when they grow up, they don't want to be a fireman or a policeman. They want to be a Minecraft YouTuber. So it's definitely something that's picking up.
Yeah, the creators and kids. Let's open it up a little bit to the audience here to see if we've got any questions that people would like to ask. Well, I actually have one more I'm going to throw out because we have a little bit of a time. One of the things that I've been sort of watching and wondering how you guys think about it is that it seems that the devices are getting more powerful. They're getting better and faster, and for a while there, initially in my mind at least, I was thinking there was consoles and PCs, and then there were apps, and they were not on par with each other. Popularity, okay, but in terms of the power of what you could do in an app. And I think that area is changing. I think those two machines are now all coming a little closer together in terms of power. And how does that affect what you're doing, what you're creating, as you get a more powerful device to be able to put your content on?
I mean, it opens up tremendous opportunity. Like, there are apps that we're making now that we couldn't have made a couple of years ago.
Exactly.
Because it's so much faster. And there also with, we don't do 3D stuff right now, but with 3D especially, the power that you now have on a sort of a regular store-bought Android or iPad is amazing, and you can essentially do real-time 3D animation, which just a couple of years ago would have been very hard.
It is pretty wild. I mean, we have probably our suite of products we put out this year that can't really run on the iPad 1 or even iPad 2. I mean, it's really unbelievable how fast that has evolved, considering 5 years ago there was no iPad, right? So it's definitely opened up a lot of opportunity, which is why we're seeing a lot of video content as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one of the big impacts is still storage. When you also, the more content you can have on the device, the more robust product you can put there.
Right.
You don't want people necessarily having to download things all the time and delete and download and delete. So I think that could be a high impact sort of element, especially for companies in the kid space, I think, that are developing catalogs of stuff, where you'd like to think that they can hold on to all of your great products and have it in that sort of toy box folder and not have to say, well, let me pick and choose what I have to delete. I think that's
an issue we still need to
it's getting there,
Yeah.
A lot of the pricing models for phone are sort of geared towards the low end storage, and that's just starting to change now.
So I'm getting the sign that we need to stop.
We have a question.
Oh, we have a question from the audience. Oh, okay, great.
Question for David. Looking at your conversion rate, are you seeing trends? For instance, are preschooler girl, converting better than preschooler boys, or are certain brand converting better than other brands in terms of paying customers?
Good question. We definitely see different trends. We sort of break apart our fans or our customers into, we sort of call it all preschool, but it's not really fair. We sort of have our young preschool boys and girls, let's say, the Caillou marketplace or the Thomas the Train marketplace, Thomas being a bit more boys, for example. We sort of divide it more like the preschool, the young preschool, and then the older. So for the older, let's say 4 to 8 years old, a lot of our customer base is actually young girls. It's dress up, it's princess, it's baking, it's all sorts of fun, creative stuff that we do. And I'd say that converting there is a bit more interesting. But at the end of the day, I think it's not really about the brand, not necessarily about the demographic. It really is about the engagement. If you create a great product for young kids, it'll convert if you've done your job right. And the same thing for girls, because you can miss, and we put out a ton of different product. all of which, when we put it to market, we said, you know what, we have something we think is next level, and if you don't balance it perfectly there, conversion's affected. So we look at it. Analytics is a huge part of our business. We got to look at what we can, certainly within the realm of compliance and COPPA and all this kind of stuff. A lot of hoops that we jump through to make sure we have safe and great product. But I'd say that it really comes down to engagement at the end of the day.
So I think, will you all be out in the hall in case people want to have, and I'd like to just again reiterate that I will also be out in the hall, and I have a big stack of business cards, which I would love for you to take. And if you are developing an app, again, the way I can do my contribution to this industry is that I write about what you do, but I can't write about what you do if you don't contact me. So I would love for you to come up, take a business card as you release new apps, and if you can get it to me early, that's even better. So, so thank you for joining us, and thank you, panelists.
Yeah, thanks.